Ajay, thanks very much for doing this for members of the Asia Society and for supporters of Pratham, of which there are many here this evening. I welcome all of you. I've heard Ajay speak often before, and I know the audience is in for a great treat. The plan this evening is to do our fireside chat for 30 or 35 minutes and then open it up to the audience for questions. So get your questions ready. We'll get into World Bank matters in a few minutes, but I'd like to start, Ajay, if you could give us your early years.
That's a long time ago.
Yeah. Where you grew up, your school and college years,
Oh, that's right.
and how you met your lovely and super smart wife, Ritu, who is here with us this evening. Ritu is sitting right over there.
So first of all, Dinny, thank you for doing this. And I was sort of in the little room outside. We were being asked, like, how did Dinny manage to get me here? And the secret little story is not that he managed. Dinny used to be my boss at Citi. It's very difficult to say no to him. So it's kind of easy to ensure that he can always twist my arm. It's also a pleasure to be here. I am actually looking forward to the conversation. Like plenty of people in this room probably, I grew up in India. I went to high school in a number of different locations. My dad was in the army and he would get transferred every couple of years. So I think I went through 7 or 8 schools before finishing schooling. And I finished school in Simla at a school called St. Edward's School. But everybody thinks of me as being from Hyderabad Public School because I was there for 2 or 3 years before Simla. And Hyderabad Public School is where Satya Nadella and Shantanu Narayan and a few of us are from. So people think that's the school we were all from. I went to St. Stephen's College, did an economics honors and MBA at IIM Ahmedabad. Yeah, the correct college across the correct side of the street. and then did my MBA at IIM Ahmedabad, which is where Ritu and I were classmates. We used to sit one seat behind each other. And I must confess, I did profess more interest in what was behind me than in front of me. And that is a long time ago. We've been married 40 years last year, and we got 2 beautiful daughters and 2 grandchildren, and all is good.
Thanks, Ajay. So, you've had a fantastic career in the private sector, including very senior roles at Citibank, followed by 12 years at the helm of MasterCard, where the company's market cap, listen to this, the company's market cap grew from $20 billion when Ajay joined to $360 billion, an 18x multiple. Do I have my arithmetic right? Yeah, it is right. Ajay, you've now been president of the World Bank for almost a year. And how do you compare and contrast your private sector role with your current role? What pleases you? What frustrates you?
I probably should have quit when I was ahead. And when the 360 happened, I did try to, but I'm back here. What pleases me? How the contrast? The contrast is actually less than people would make it out to be. The real difference is in the governance model of the institution, which leads to its own challenges when you're working there. But the governance model of the World Bank, unlike the companies we will be part of, is, in our case, there's 25 board members, which is roughly 2.5 to 3 times what you're used to working with. They're there because we do take taxpayer money, and therefore, at the end of the day, countries who provide money as well as those who receive the money would like to have a voice in how the bank constructs and operates its mandate. And so that leads to 25 board members. They are resident executive board members, as in they sit in the building and they have lots of advisors. And their advisors and them are therefore in the management system all day long. That's a very different model from anything we're used to. The second real difference is the tools of managing people that you have in the private sector, where it has to do with the incentive methodology, which is normally compensation of different types, bonuses, long-term incentives. You don't have those tools and methodologies in an institution like the bank. Those two are the biggest differences. Otherwise, Dinny, at the end of the day, you're trying to look at issues, complex issues, break them down into simpler portions, make sense out of them for everybody who's there with you, make it simple enough that the most junior employee can feel they're a part of the solution, and then give them clear vision of where you want to go, create ways of measuring progress, and celebrate success and care about failure. It's not that different. It's the governance and the tools that can be different. What pleases me the most is the amazing quality of the people. If I was telling someone this morning, I wanted to learn a little bit about how water and its conservation and its recycling and the like, and its extraction from salt and what that would do in the case of seawater and so on. I want to learn about it. I was going to the Middle East and said, I need to be intelligent about this topic. And I learned there are 700 people in the bank who work on water projects around the world. $40 billion is the current book of projects there. A number of these guys are PhDs in the space. They're acknowledged experts. They have lived and worked with their families in the most difficult countries. And they know what they're doing. It's a pleasure to be with them. They stretch your mind, they grow you, and that's an amazing experience. The frustration is also the people in a way. And the reason is that they, like other academics, the pursuit of knowledge sometimes can overtake the end delivery of the outcome. And what's happened is, over the years, the bank has had and developed a corporate scorecard. When I came, it was 155 items. In our lives, when you have a corporate scorecard of 155, you're always going to get an excellent. Because 30 things you're going to knock out of the park, and nobody will get to the other 125 because they'll get so bored by the time you finish evaluating the 30 that they'll pass out. And that is not, and it's not the fault of the people. This is the governance and the people. Every board member, every country, every interest in that country wants its indicator on the scorecard. So everybody's intention is appropriate, but the end result is inappropriate. And I think that's the challenge of getting these very talented people to understand the need for change, to embrace it with their heart and mind, and to become a part of it and drive it, without which we can't win, without the standard tools of motivation that you would have in the private sector. That is the challenge. And to me, it's not a frustration, it's a challenge. And that's what I'm focused on.
Okay. Pretty good answer.
I mean, the truth will set you free.
You're obviously, by any measure, one of the world's outstanding leaders. Give us your thoughts on what are the characteristics that go into making and becoming an effective leader.
Making and becoming.
Well, let's keep it becoming for the moment, and then we can, if you have time.
I think it flows. I think the part about making that's important, I know you believe this because you helped me, is that leadership is not your birthright. And the ability and humility to understand that it isn't your birthright, but that you can do well in it if you're willing to learn from other people, and if you get the right opportunities along your way, and you have the willingness to make mistakes and take risks and do all that. I think that answers the first part, the fact that you need to believe that it's not yours, but you can earn it and you can do well with it. And you have to have people who teach you and mentor you and give you the opportunity and guide you when you fall down. What makes a good leader is a little bit of all those, because one of your jobs is to develop people of that type. But I think, the real challenge in leadership has 2 or 3 dimensions. And the first dimension is, once you get past this idea of it's not your birthright, then you have to think through what is it that you can do for people who work for you to make them follow you. And I think to follow you, one, they have to believe in where they're going. So there has to be a clear, simple is a very important word, a clear and simple vision of where you want to go. We live in a very complex world, and it's very easy to allow that complexity to impact how you communicate and how you drive. And if you were to do that, you will lose a lot of people along the way, because their interpretations of that complexity creates its own mess inside the institutions. So simplifying it down is actually the hardest thing to do, but it's the best thing to do. Once you get that vision clear, if you can create the right measurement tools to measure progress against that vision and communicate that vision and those tools thousands of times in the simplest possible way without getting frustrated, without losing your own energy and passion for that change every morning, and that takes you a long way. And it enables people to follow you and to feel that they're a part of your process. And you have to celebrate victories and not shoot those who failed, because you want people to try new things. And if everything worked well, you wouldn't be trying out and taking new risks. And I think all these are interesting, challenging traits of building the right followership behind you. In the bank and in my prior life at MasterCard, and you know this from Citi, I have 3 characteristics that I'm trying to hold leadership responsible for. And the first one, and they sound complicated because there are 2 sides, there's a balance on both sides. So the first one is a sense of urgency, because you will never have perfect information, and procrastination is your enemy, because things are changing really fast. But you can't have that sense of urgency and not listen to people who may know more than you do before you make up your mind. So finding the balance to have that sense of urgency to take a decision without perfect information, but having the patience to listen to people who are probably smarter than you. Most of the time that is the case.
I doubt it.
Oh, they are. It's their subject matter expertise and their knowledge is really important. So you do that, that's very helpful. The second one is connected to that, and that's the idea of taking risks. So you do have to take that risk, because that risk-reward arbitrage is what we're all trying to do. The problem is you've got to take thoughtful risks. And there is no description of thoughtfulness in a textbook. It is an art form that you learn as you go along, and you will make your mistakes, and so you have to admit up to them. And that comes to the third part, is empowerment but accountability. A lot of people want empowerment. They rarely want the accountability that they should shoulder as a part of that empowerment. So having leadership traits that balance urgency with patience to listen, balance the desire for risk-taking with doing so thoughtfully, and balance the power of empowerment with the importance of accountability is the traits that I'm trying to drive into the system. And the last thing I'd say is that good leaders have 2 other traits that have nothing to do with this, but one is a sense of competitive paranoia. And what I mean by competitive paranoia is kind of the moment you start feeling that everything is good, it's a really good time for you to go away. And if you are constantly concerned about that little bit of competitive paranoia, healthy competitive paranoia, it's a good thing for you. It keeps you on your toes. And that connects to the last item, which is you should make all efforts to not take with you everywhere you go the same people you worked with earlier, the same people who went to the same schools with you, whom you grew up with, because you will take your blind spots with you. You will surround yourself with people who you may be very comfortable with, but you will never know where your blind spots are, because you will share them together, and the best way to get extinct is to have blind spots. So to surround yourself at a table where people at the table did not go to the same school, did not grow up in the same atmosphere, didn't have the same experiences, didn't work with you in your prior job, but are actually willing to bring their experiences, their skills, and their knowledge to the table, that is actually the ultimate meaning of diversity. It's not only ethnic, gender, and religion. It is actually the brains and experience and the willingness of these people to be around you. That is your single strongest power as a leader.
Very good answer. Thank you very much. We all know that the World Bank is a huge and complex organization. Explain the vision that you have for the bank and how you plan to make that vision a reality. And I know there are many parts to this, so I'll just let you pick and choose.
I mean, the vision for the bank is not just mine. When I walked into this job, first I got nominated back. I just finished a year at the job, exactly, by 2 days. And I got nominated back in February of last year. And I had about 90 days before the election, and we spent a lot of time traveling around the world, meeting countries and civil society and CEOs to sort of drink in what is it that was being sought. And the G20 and the G7 and these countries had a reform agenda for the bank, which is, I would say a topic that gets brought up every time I talk to anybody. It's about reform. In those 90 days, I had a chance to speak or meet with 93 heads of state or finance ministers. I spoke to about 100 civil society organizations and about 15, 20 CEOs of asset management companies and operators and the like. And I came away with 4 clear impressions, all of which are germane to the topic of what we're trying to do. The first one was, you guys are too complicated. We don't understand you. Too many silos, takes too long. Everything takes too long, it's too complicated. Second one was, you're going to lecture us, which you shouldn't. And the third one was, on the other side, you don't do enough on a whole range of things, which you should. And then the fourth one, which is the most interesting, was the realization that sank in as I met all these people, that being focused only on poverty and the sharing of prosperity, which is what the bank was devoted to for many years in a good way, that was limited by the fact that the world's challenges had evolved to a relatively complex stage where the intertwining of these challenges made it impossible to put things into neat little buckets. And so what do I mean by that? I mean food insecurity, climate change, pandemics, fragility, conflict, violence. You can't solve poverty without that. You look at COVID, I think that really brought it home. Post-COVID, there are 70 million more people living in poverty than there were the time we entered into COVID.
Wow, I didn't know that.
But if you went back 30 years in the world was winning on poverty for 30 years, mostly because the middle income countries were generating jobs. Jobs are the best way to drive a nail into the coffin of poverty. And those who don't understand that and break it down into things, all of which are interesting, but unless they come together and create a job, you neither create the drive against poverty, because poverty is not just a state of being, it's a state of mind. And jobs give you the being and the mind, your dignity. And, China and India and Brazil and Mexico and Turkey created hundreds of millions of jobs, which is why these countries lifted people out of poverty. You may disagree with the numbers, you may think more should have got lifted, the numbers are this, it doesn't matter. The reality on the ground is these countries have lifted hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. That war got reversed 2020, 13th of March, in this country, this city, but earlier in countries overseas, and then the next 2 years set us back a long way. That concept of intertwined challenges, climate refugees, people running from fragility, conflict, and violence. Today, there's 114 million people in the world, and the UN is going to update that figure, the UNHCR, in a few days. It's going to be higher. I know the number, but I'm not supposed to tell you the number, but 114 is the public number as of the last one. 114 million people are refugees in the world. It is the highest number ever. 10 years ago, that number was less than 40% of that. And that's the fragility, conflict, violence. It's the running away from climate. It's various things that are causing it. So this intertwined nature of challenges is what defines the vision of the bank. I want to get to remaining focused on poverty because the fight's not over by any stretch, but fight it on a livable planet. And by livable planet, I'm trying to expand the aperture of our people to address pandemics, climate change, fragility, conflict, violence, whatever is the relevant issue around livable planet in that market, in that country, in that space. I put in there the aspect of focusing on women and young people. And in the beginning, I had a pushback saying, you're leaving other disadvantaged people out. And I have a fundamental disagreement with that because women are not a minority. They're half. This idea that women are, by focusing on them, you're not focusing on the other affected minorities, I actually think that is nonsense. And therefore, we have to focus on that 50% because productivity, growth, our future, our happiness depends on that 50% getting the same opportunity that we both get. And this is a problem in the developed world. If you go to Silicon Valley and you look at the percentage of money from Silicon Valley that goes into female-originated businesses, it is shameful. So don't think this is a problem in Africa and India. It's a problem here, even today. And so that idea of getting women into the focus of the bank, and then young people, because the Global South, which is where our mandate is there's a 1.2 billion young people who over the next decade will become eligible for a job. And eligibility for a job is defined as 15 plus. That's how the ILO defines it.
15 plus?
15 to 24, kind of that age group,
okay.
is 1 billion too. Some of those will be in school. But that the same countries are only going to generate 400 odd million jobs against the 1.2 that is coming through the pipe. So this demographic dividend may not be a light at the end of the tunnel. It could be a train coming our way. If we don't do something about these people, they need to have clean air, clean water, education, healthcare when they're growing up. And when they're growing up, they must have the dignity of a job. That's a problem. And so I'm kind of focusing the bank on not just the ingredients, the inputs, but the output, the outcome, which is jobs for young people and women and the right to a fair share in the world.
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And there's many subsets of that. The inputs are, from climate change. We can talk about all that or answer questions on it. It's got to do with skilling. It's got to do with healthcare and electricity. And those are all very passionate topics that connect to jobs, but it's jobs.
Yeah. So Ajay, I wanted to ask you, everybody these days is talking about AI is the two most common letters in the language. What in your view will be the impact of AI, particularly in the Global South?
Well, there could be a bot doing the interview with me. That is probably the most likely example. A bot talking to a bot, both of us will be hanging around there. You've got a more serious question than that answer. So, I think AI is an interesting word for data analytics on steroids. And when we were younger, Lotus spreadsheets and things came to work, and you began to fill data in them and then use macros to compute outcomes. AI is all that multiplied millions of times over. The opportunity that gives for better delivery of healthcare, education, efficiency is amazing. There's no doubt on that. And could that be very effective in countries around the world? Yes, it could, without a doubt. The concern I have is twofold on the other side. which needs management. The first one is that will it lead to more inequality over the years? And I think the jury's out on that. But the way I think about it is that what makes AI work is first, electricity. Second, computing power. Third, data, lots of it, organized simply in its most simple form with privacy, security guaranteed for people. And the final item is people who know how to use that data to create the algorithms to enable AI to become self-sustaining. Let's take those four things. 600 million people in Africa have no electricity. When you fly over Africa at night, it's dark. It's not because people don't live there. It's because they're living like our forefathers, even today. So one of the things I was talking about jobs, one of the things I'm committing to is to reach 300 million people in Africa by 2030 with renewable energy. Because I think if you don't, electricity is a human right. And it's not there in Africa. So that's one example. Then you come to computing power. That's expensive. Then you come to data. Where's the data best organized? Not in these countries. And then you come to the people who understand how to use that data. And where are they? Not in these countries. So I actually think that if you're not careful, AI will concentrate more ability and more capability in the wealthier countries and in the bigger firms. And that could lead to the unintended consequence of more concentration of wealth and inequality. I think the second little thing we've got to watch out for is the rule book around AI. And again, the jury's out. There are a lot of people who think that social media and the internet would not have developed if government had created regulations. And I think there is truth in that. The problem is we haven't done very well with social media with no regulation.
That's for sure.
We're all seeing it today, in the good and the bad of it. So the question is, at what point is the line in the sand that says this is a good time to go past the innovation topic to also creating some guide rails for future development of this amazing technology that could do everything that we want in our future? And I'm not sure how to answer that yet. I'm struggling my way through it as well. But to me, that's the topic of AI.
So we're coming close to opening it to the audience, but I have one more question before I open it to the audience. You have such an interesting lens into the world economy. I think there'd be few people who have that lens. How concerned should we be about China's slowdown? If in fact there is a slowdown.
Oh, there is a slowdown. There's no doubt. The slowdown, in my opinion, the real reason for this slowdown is not caused by anything other than an imbalance in the Chinese economy at its fundamental construct. It is a very productive, intensive production, therefore manufacturing-oriented economy, which then is very well geared for logistics and export. It is unbelievably efficient on that. But its consumption does not keep pace because it is inadequately provided for safety nets for its citizenry, and therefore people tend to keep money as compared to spend it. There are a few investment vehicles, asset management companies are inadequate compared to the wealth of China. When you put all that together, you create the imbalance where a drive to produce with great efficiency, very well, high quality, high logistics, high capability, compared to a lower consumption, creates a surplus in the economy that creates this challenge. It got, over time, real estate was a way to create that investment. That thing seems to have run its course. The idea of driving growth through urbanization has run its course. The growth rate of the population is now in the other direction. That's happening in a number of countries, but it is quite obvious in China. So there's a multiple sets of things that are going on that have got a structural imbalance in the economy. The government seems to recognize this issue. They're not naive. People who believe they're naive are wrong. They kind of get it. They're working their way through the municipal debt mountain that has got created from their earlier model of growth. They have the balance sheet to be able to do so. But I don't know whether time is on their side and how long this can take to get done. Your question was not just about China, it's about the impact on the rest of us, about their slowdown. Of course we should be, because if they keep manufacturing, then you end up with the fear of excess capacity. They don't consume enough, and the country becomes socially unstable. You cannot afford to have 1.5 billion people in one of the wealthiest countries in the world not being productive, constructive parts of our civilization. So I think there is much to be concerned about if things don't turn, but there are very smart people there trying to figure their way through it. We'll see.
Okay. So we're now going to open it up to the audience. We've got about between 15 and 20 minutes of questions from the audience, but I'm going to have one last bite at the apple towards the very end. So, question number one. Let's start with the left side here, this gentleman over here.
Thank you so much. Hi, Mr. Banga. My name is Saiful Salihuddin. I'm an economist at the World Economic Forum. Before this, I was at the Central Bank of Malaysia, so much closer to the World Bank, but now in a different space. But I'm curious, you mentioned urbanization, and I think we all know the trend of urbanization. I mean, right now, most of people already live in cities, and over 70% of the world population will live in cities in like a few more decades. So the cities are really at the forefront of a lot of this global challenges that we're facing today, including, and most importantly, the climate crisis. But the cities are not equipped to handle that. They don't, the financing environment for cities are not very welcoming. And as I understood as well, not a lot of finance from multinational development banks like the World Bank goes to cities, and there's a lot of complexity between national government and cities government. So do you see this changing? Do you see multinational development banks like the World Bank or others like ADB and stuff will be focusing more or expanding their mandate around helping access for financing for cities to handle or address these challenges?
I think you've got the gist of the question.
So, I mean, there's two aspects to it. First of all, you've got to remember, forecasts are not destiny. And the fact that everybody makes this beautiful straight line forecast in economics, like I'm an economics graduate, these get made, that it'll go to 70%, was the same forecast that said that China's growth will only be this way. And before that, that Japan's growth will only be this way. Nothing is only this way. Everything does this over time. And so I don't believe that number. That's the first real issue. Because I think that the challenges of continuing urbanization are so difficult in terms of quality of life and the development system of a country that I don't think this will persist the way it is. If the reason I mentioned it in the case of China is I know for a fact that one of the things China wants to work on with the bank is how to create more rural development. For exactly this reason, that their view of the urbanization model has changed over time. Other countries are still to believe that to be the case, but you only have to go to countries in my country of birth, or cities in my country of birth, to see the unbelievable stress in their cities on water, parking, healthcare, education, clean air. It's all happening there. So I think I'm not so sure that that 70% number will necessarily come to fruition. But then hope's not a strategy either. So hanging around waiting for the future to change that number won't work. So there are many things being done at multilateral development banks to not only lend at the federal level or the state level, but also start working with subnationals like cities. In fact, just today I was having a long conversation about what all we can do with municipal financing in different cities around the world. We have a level of expertise in how to build a municipal finance marketplace. And could we find ways to broaden our access of that through knowledge academies and the like to cities and mayors and to governments to enable a diversification of funding flow to those cities. The challenge typically has been the capacity of that city and its government to be able to do what we're just discussing in a way that makes sense. So the other part of our story, which I didn't really talk about in the reform of the bank, is to use what I call there's a money bank and a knowledge bank inside the World Bank. The money bank is what people keep talking about. The knowledge bank is actually even more valuable because of the success transfer and the subject matter expertise that those people have. If I can divert more of them to helping with capacity in cities and countries, project design, project management, project execution, then maybe I can be of even bigger help to those places. So it's a complex topic to talk in 2 minutes, but you get the idea.
I'd like to give a question to a lady over there.
Hi, Seema Modi from CNBC. Ajay, it's nice to see you. I think some of us in the room would appreciate your take on India. You mentioned the country, but just in light of recent events, post-election, a leader who may not have as strong of a mandate to push some crucial economic reforms through, your outlook, and can India be the next China? Thanks.
Yeah. So I've said publicly, and I still believe this, that I'm more optimistic economically about India today than I've been in the prior 30 years. And the reason for that is that infrastructure and the power of electricity and bridges, roads, airports, rails, that is the fundamental building block of economic growth and jobs. And if you asked me how jobs would come, and we didn't get into that, but for Africa, for example, I think of 5 things. The first one is electricity. The second one is infrastructure. The third one is healthcare, which is why the banks announced we're going to reach 1.5 billion people with improved primary healthcare by 2030. And the fourth one is agribusiness, and the fifth one is tourism. That's Africa. India isn't exactly that, although some of those do apply to India too. But without the basic infrastructure, electricity and infrastructure, both of which India is doing a pretty good job of, without that, you can't get to the next stage of thinking about jobs. What they haven't done well enough yet is to convert that into enough jobs, because the manufacturing growth story requires 2 things for you to believe in it. The first one is land labor reform in addition to this infrastructure. That has been challenging. That could be challenging even in the future. But the second one is the issue of, is the world trade system what it was 10 years ago, when people used to think that if I was able to fit myself into the global supply chain, I have an automatic growth engine here, which is what China did, and I think Bangladesh to some extent, Vietnam to some extent, Mexico currently is doing some of that. I don't know the answer to that yet. I think the jury's out on that one. So can India grow jobs in other ways? Absolutely. Agribusiness, certainly. Tourism, certainly. India gets 12 million tourists. New York City gets 62. Paris gets 64. London gets 63. And so there's ways to build jobs. Those create jobs from, they may not be as powerful jobs as that of a assembly worker in an iPhone factory. But not every job is created equal everywhere in the world anyway. And so creating enough jobs to provide that dignity and hope, that's what I hope this new government will, their new mandate will focus on that. I have no idea how the politics will work out. I decided long ago when I left India that I was no longer a citizen of India at that time, that I will keep my comments on politics to a country I'm a citizen of and not to where I'm not. But economically and developmentally, I'm happy to believe that there are real opportunities ahead for India.
Can I interrupt? One of the things you didn't mention, Ajay, was education. The importance of education for getting jobs.
So to me, education and skill is a very interesting topic. So when I talked about those 5 verticals of electricity, infrastructure, I actually count education capacity in the infrastructure. But for a minute, let's discuss education for a separate reason. And then the other 3 were, agribusiness and healthcare and tourism. Got to be careful with education and what you want with it. If you believe these 5 areas to be the growth areas of job generation, then for healthcare, what do you really need? Do you need only doctors, or do you need nurses, medical technicians, PPE manufacturing jobs, vaccine and medicine manufacturing jobs? What all do you need? And therefore, is the answer to education a certain kind of pattern, or is it also more diverse, including skilling institutes of the right type that are built backward from where you think the demand will go. I don't think that's not the sophisticated way that currently this gets planned. It tends to be, everybody thinks of college as aspirational, and college being undergrad degrees and then a postgrad. And I don't know. I don't know that that is what will help us over the coming 10 to 15 years to get those billion people a job. I'm not sure. So I think this is all things that I think need attention. I'm trying to create a very talented group of people to help me think through this jobs issue, led by, again, I can't yet speak to who they are, but we're getting there, and I'll be able to announce it soon. But these are leading heads of state or former heads of state, as well as academics and entrepreneurs who have built jobs. And I'm trying to get them to argue this topic through as to how to create jobs appropriate for a country, Africa differently from India, but also what infrastructure will help it happen.
Questions?
I mean, digitization is another important part of infrastructure, so yes.
It's going to be tough, but I'll try to get to everyone. This gentleman over here, yes. Sorry, I'll come to you next. Thank you.
Ajay, great to have you here. Thank you. As someone who's an alum from the same undergrad and business school, it's really inspiring to have you here. So there's a lot of chaos in the world.
Younger than I am.
Just a little bit.
Yeah.
I met my wife at Stevens Eco as well, so we were classmates. The world is pretty.
You don't need marriage bureaus if you go to the right college.
Exactly. You don't need Indian matchmaking either. The world is pretty chaotic, right? If you think about Russia, Ukraine, if you think about Israel, Palestine, you think about all the heightening tensions with China geopolitically, more and more right-leaning governments coming into many countries across the globe. You talked a little bit about that tension in the world, but could you go a little bit deeper on how is that chaos and that geopolitical world interacting with your world of the global economy, and what is it doing in terms of your agenda, and what's becoming harder in that kind of world?
It's giving me gray hair, but it's in my office every day. Remember those 25 executive directors? They represent 189 countries. Some of the larger donors have individual EDs. Some of the others, recipients, share across an executive director, and I see it every day in the pressures I get from them, from the governors who are the finance ministers of these countries. I see it from civil society. I see it from the press and social media. It's every day. So multilateralism is currently going through a very difficult set of challenges. And I don't think I can ever discount those. But our job is not to whine about it, but to get stuff done through it. So I will tell you, during this same period, we've got large capital increases through hybrid capital and portfolio guarantees in the World Bank. We'll be able to announce climate-resistant debt clauses for small states and nations, where Prime Minister Mia Mottley, who used to criticize the multilateral banks for not doing enough, today will tell you that the World Bank is the example that she's looking for. You can get things done. You have to find your way to them. You have to argue your case for them. You don't win all the battles, but I'll take the 5 I win, because that's 5 more than just sitting and whining. So, it's hard, but that's what I took the job on for. And the second piece of this is that there's many things we're trying to get done as part of the reform of the institution during this same stress of multilateralism. Wars set everything back. What's going on in Palestine and Gaza and Israel is obviously going to be very challenging for that particular circumstance. Russia and Ukraine is already very challenging. But people forget the war in Sudan, where many more have died than today you've read in others. So, there's this conflict and violence is unfortunately across many parts of our world right now. And my general approach is stay focused on what you can control and try and make it happen, and at scale. So I'm trying to get things done to make the bank fit purpose for the next 20 years. And that includes, don't take 19 months from project starting to project approval. Bring it down to 12. We're at 16, I'm going to bring it to 12. Combine country management in countries so that our silos are not becoming a client's problem. But one person is available for them to go to. Make one country business plan across all parts of the institution, focus it on fewer things so you can put scale to work on items. Drive a culture of scalability and replicability in the institution rather than always celebrating new, smarter ways of doing something. If something works, duplicate it, replicate it, quadruplicate it, let's win. And let's get it to scale. Those kinds of things can be enormously helpful in moving the needle as compared to only worrying about the stuff and wringing your hands and recognizing the problem. The problem is there. We're living through it. But we should do something about it.
Yes, I promised you, and then the one over there next, and then one more at the back. I think we have time for 3 questions. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Wei Shen. I'm a Schwarzman Scholar from China. You have been a business leader in both private sector and international institutions. And for me, a very unique feature of the World Bank Group is that it has international finance corporations, which is working with private sector to do development matters. I was wondering, what's your take on the role that can be played by private sector and private finance in future development matters? And if it was actually that important, how come other MDBs and other international agencies, such as those in UN system, haven't evolved themselves to tap into this wealth of resources that can be used for greater goods? Thank you.
Thank you. By the way, IDB, the Inter-American Development Bank, is something called IDB Invest, which is their equivalent to the IFC. And the Asian Development Bank actually does private sector work, but does it together with its developmental arm. So everybody has got some version of this. The European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, EBRD, is almost entirely focused on the private sector. So there are institutions around that are doing this. But your question is much deeper than that. Your question is about the role of the private sector. So it depends how you look at this, but if the starting point is the kind of resources you need to drive the change in these complex intertwined challenges. So let's take climate change. And let's break climate change into just one thing for a minute, renewable energy. Not fair, but let's say that's the only thing we're discussing. To be able to do, again, these are forecasts and estimates, and so please, you can discount them by a few zeros here or there, but people will estimate it takes $1 trillion a year to get renewable energy going at the scale and size across the world that we need to do to meet the Paris Accords for 2050. So let's just take that number as $1 trillion plus. So let's take $1 trillion. There is no way that multilateral development banks' balance sheets or government resources, even China or the United States, can bring that kind of money to bear in today's issue of fiscal constraints. I'm not saying there isn't work to be done, but in today's issue. People think that means that I believe that the only solution is to go outside the system. That's nonsense. Just the reality is, even if we do all we did with hybrid capital, portfolio guarantees and the like, and we do more of this over the coming years, there's a G20 expert group that laid out by Larry Summers and N.K. Singh that said that the Western world should fund the World Bank or the other multilateral banks with another couple of $100 billion of capital. They should, but even that won't solve the trillions. And first of all, they aren't, but if they did, it wouldn't solve the trillions. So we've got to work on getting more from them, but we have to find a way past this topic. And the only place where you'll get large-scale money to come to work is the private sector if their incentives are aligned and their risk is understood adequately for their investors to believe this is a good use of their money. So in the case of renewable energy, solar and wind are proven to now be per unit cheaper than fossil fuel. They may have a higher gestation time period. They may have higher capital costs to construct compared to lower depreciated costs already in coal and the coal fleet and gas fleet and so on. But the fact is, very quickly, that curve bends down with scale and the per unit cost comes below fossil fuel. Then why is it that the private sector is not beating down the doors of the middle income countries trying to put plants up? This is not about Europe and the US. where there is investment going on. It's about the middle income countries, where if we don't invest in renewable energy, all the things we do in the developed world to reduce the consumption of emission-heavy, intensive energy will be washed over by the growth of the middle class and its consumption in these middle-income countries. That's just math. So you have to focus on these 10, 12 middle-income countries. China is one of them. India is one of them. Indonesia, Bangladesh, Vietnam, Turkey, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Brazil, Mexico. I probably missed one or two. But those are the ones you have to do. If you're going to focus on those, why is it that these guys aren't going there? And the reasons are 5. The first one is not enough clarity of regulatory policy. If you get regulatory policy clarity, you get clarity on tariffs, you will get money to come. If you ask a private sector investor to create a spreadsheet of risk management and you tell them, I don't know what tariff you're going to get paid, I don't know how long you're going to get it paid for, I don't know if you'll get paid every month or once in 3 months, I'm not even sure if you'll get paid 4 times a year. They're going to take their marbles and go play elsewhere. So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is even if they get that, they need some kind of political risk insurance. That we can help with. We have an institution called MIGA. We've got many acronyms in our institution, but this one generates political risk insurance and lays it off into the reinsurance market. I'm actually bringing it all together, scaling it up. I can do that. The third is foreign exchange. That's hard. You're investing in dollars and euros and yen, and you're getting paid in local currency in a 30-year payback. That's an unhedged exposure for many more years than people are willing to take. So can we find intelligent ways to do that? Can the bank take on some of that risk? Can the country take on some of that risk? And so on. That's a topic we're working our way through. The fourth is IFC, what works with the private sector. What these investors would like is for us to take the first loss, junior equity. So we become the player that absorbs that first hit and therefore improves the reliability of their return. The problem is if I take the hit, I got to go back to my shareholders to recapitalize myself. If you read the newspaper, it's kind of hard to get money from the Western world and the OECD into these institutions, back to the earlier topic. So can we create a first loss fund, a philanthropic fund, something there to help absorb the volatility of that kind of investment? And the last one is, can you create an asset class out of these investments? So a bit like the securitization markets of other asset classes, can you make that big enough for large pension funds and operators to bring money to this table? If you tell Larry Fink of BlackRock, wouldn't you like to have more exposure to water in Africa? He will say yes. But to give that to him, if you bring him 20 projects of 20, 30, 40 million each, there is no way he can economically underwrite those and add that up to any size or scale that moves the needle for him. So creating standardized, securitizable asset class is another opportunity. So there are 5 different things we're working on. Some of them are easier, some of them are harder, but they all come from the basic belief that there will not be enough money to manage these intertwined challenges. I just talked about renewable energy. We could talk about all the others, and they add up to many trillions. I don't want to leave you thinking that there aren't sources. The other side of the story is that the world spends $1.6 trillion a year on subsidizing fossil fuels and agriculture. 1.6 trillion. The hidden cost of that fossil fuel subsidy in terms of health and challenges is another 6 trillion a year. Let's forget the hidden cost as being mumbo jumbo. Let's talk the 1.6 that's real cash. I'm not saying you shouldn't subsidize cooking gas cylinders to a poor lady in India. I get it. You should. But can you redirect subsidies where possible? So Europe is a case in point. They were putting 60 billion into subsidizing the use of fertilizer, which creates the wrong use, the wrong incentive, runoffs, all the chemical challenges, all that stuff. The same 60 billion is now being given to the farmers to reduce the use of fertilizer in their growth. That's a clever use of subsidies that's better for a global public good. So all I'm saying is there are pools of money of that type. There's domestic resource mobilization. A lot of these countries have a tax to GDP ratio of 2%. At 2%, the government has nothing, no capacity to reinvest in its society. So there are things to be done that aren't just a handout but also work that needs to happen to enable some of this work to do. So, long answer, but it's a topic that keeps me up at night.
So I can't keep my promise for 2 more questions. I'm really sorry about that. We've gone already 5 minutes over time. I'm sort of tempted to ask for one more question, but it has to be from a lady. So is there any lady who has a question? You'll get a chance upstairs. We'll have a question upstairs. Any ladies up there? If not, oh, there's a lady up there at the back. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's a deal. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Arjun. I'm 17. Good evening. Thank you so much for coming. And it seems that the world that my generation, our generation, is set to inherit has countless challenges, from economic inequality, food insecurity, the climate crisis, and all the other issues that you mentioned previously. What gives, or I should ask, is there hope? And if so, which I hope, what gives you hope for our future? Thank you.
Young people. I get asked this all the time. My biggest source of optimism is the energy and enthusiasm of young people. Every generation thinks that their problems are the hardest problems. I'm sure my parents did too. And I'm sure their parents did too. That's why we guys are whining about how hard it is right now. Don't take that as the conclusion. There is much that can be done. What is required is a practical way of thinking about this. So to give you an example on climate, since we were talking about that, there are many aspects of climate change. Renewable energy is one part. But even if you figure that out, I'm talking emissions right now. I'm not even talking adaptation, just emissions. Even if you fix that, we have to worry about heavy transportation, trucks, buses, ships, airplanes, and their use of energy. Let's say we fix that. We have to think about steel, copper, and how those are made and the energy they use. Let's say we fix that. We have to worry about methane in agriculture. Again, something the bank is very focused on. Let's say we fix that too. We will still need to do something about carbon capture, because the science will tell you that that's going to be required. Now we can become evangelists about this and say, and I understand why people say this, that if you give in to the idea of investing in carbon capture, you're giving fossil fuel companies a free way out. The problem is, this is about my grandchildren and your children. We have to look at the science and decide as society whether we can afford to pick and choose golden and silver bullets to decide to play Russian roulette with our children's lives, or whether our generation, your generation, deserves to do more than one thing to be able to really hit this problem in the center so that our children and your children can have the life that I was lucky to have. That is the issue. So that optimism I have, because I think you guys will do it just like we are trying to do it. I'm very firmly convinced that will work well.
Thanks so much.